So let's step back in history real fast. It is not new for millions of people to take on systems much bigger than ourselves, right? Like when we think about taking on Polaroid or Barclays Bank or Chevron or Maersk, one of the world's largest shipping companies that you'll learn about in a moment, it can feel very, very big, right? It can feel a lot bigger than us. But people have done this before. So famously, there's the Polaroid boycott in the 1970s. This was 7 years of work led by Black staff from Polaroid, some of whom were then fired, um, to stop Polaroid from enabling the surveillance apparatus that made apartheid possible. So this was ordinary workers, right? And they were first met with pacification and normalization, right? To try to make conditions better for Black South Africans was what Polaroid first said, but they didn't give up and they actually struggled for 6 more years to get the first major win on a corporate campaign in South Africa. We also saw an even longer campaign to get Barclays Bank, which is a major bank in the UK, to divest. And you had students literally chopping up their credit cards and shutting down branches with pickets and boycotts. That campaign, as you can see, took 18 years of work, right? These are not short wins, but they are dramatic. Most recently, the same target, Barclays Bank, is being targeted for divestment on Palestine, specifically the extended, sustained work of everything from bans dropping out of festivals sponsored by Barclays to forms of direct action by groups like Palestine Action. These all added up for Barclays to sell its stock in Elbit, which is Israel's largest weapons company and is both a profiteer on the US-Mexico border in surveillance and deportation, and also manufactures drones and surveillance equipment that kill Palestinians in the Gaza genocide. So again, long campaigns. It might feel like we're tiny ants pushing a massive international boulder, but millions and millions and millions of us, much like we see in the animal world, can collectively move a boulder. It really is possible. So we wanted to give that historical context. You can go to the next slide. So we can economically isolate Zionism through institutions, corporations, and governments cutting their ties with genocide. We wanted to give you, before we jump into these contemporary campaigns, so we're about to talk about Chevron, Maersk, Israel bonds. We actually wanted to step back in time, almost a decade, and talk about St. Louis. So I'm going to call up Celine, my colleague. The two of us make up the organizing team at the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, and she's just going to give you a tiny snapshot into how large corporations like these, that again might feel so hard to dislodge from our communities, actually have been pushed to cut ties with genocide in the past. So Celine, you can go ahead.
Hey everyone, my name is Celine. I'm also here at USCPR with Leah. I'm just going to really briefly talk about the campaign against Veolia, which was a French multinational corporation that gives us like a significant example of a successful campaign pressuring a corporation. And Veolia was targeted. This campaign had its victory back in 2015, and it was targeted because of its involvement in different Zionist projects, including the operation of bus services to settlements in occupied Palestine, to its participation in something called the Jerusalem Light Rail Project, which connected West Jerusalem to settlements. So basically, there was a huge BDS effort around this corporation where organizers exerted multiple, had a really good strategy and a variety of tactics, including economic pressures. So organizers targeted Veolia's contracts with municipal governments, which was a key income source for the company. So they were able to lobby city councils. They were able to highlight Veolia's complicity in international law violations, and they were able to successfully persuade several municipalities to terminate or refuse to renew contracts with Veolia. So, for example, in 2009 in Stockholm, the city council decided to not renew its $4.5 billion contract with Veolia for managing the city's metro system. The campaign also had a really big coalition, including church organizations, labor unions, environmental activists, Palestinian organizations, and solidarity groups, and this helped amplify the campaign's reach and impact. There was also a narrative aspect to the campaign as well as legal action, so there were a lot of efforts made to raise public awareness about Veolia's activities through protests, educational campaigns, And there was also a lawsuit that was filed against Veolia in French courts by the Palestine Liberation Organization and a French Palestine Solidarity Association that was challenging its involvement in projects that were meant to expand settlements and solidify annexation in Palestine. And even though the court found no breach of law, technically, the legal action still really increased public scrutiny of Veolia's operations. Another aspect of this campaign was obviously advocacy and mobilization. So you had different unions collaborating with organizations to pressure local governments and institutions to cut their ties with Veolia. And unions also emphasized Veolia's poor labor practices, including anti-labor activities, privatization efforts, and this also resonated with broader labor rights movements and garnered additional support. Another aspect to this campaign was contract pressure. So by focusing on Veolia's municipal contracts, organizers were able to influence decisions leading to the loss of significant contracts. So another example, in 2012, Veolia withdrew from a $4.7 billion contract in North London under pressure from a 2-year campaign by the No to Veolia Action Group. So you can see there were multiple local efforts against this international target, and overall the campaign, I think in total took around 7 years. And then you had different financial institutions divest, you had different protests and campaigns in different countries. And after a series of, public pressure and financial losses estimated at around $20 billion due to lost contracts and divestments, Veolia began divesting from its Israeli operations. So just wanted to give an overall really big picture example of an international target that had a sustained campaign against it with multiple local efforts that were coordinated and that resulted in a victory. And just understanding that these are long-term campaigns, but with a sustained strategy and the strong organization behind them, they can be successful. I'll pass it back to Leah.
Thank you, Celine. So again, dozens, hundreds, thousands of people in your community can come together to shake these extremely powerful beasts that are corporations complicit in apartheid and genocide. So with that in mind, first I want to let y'all know slides, notes that our coach Ahlam is working hard to take right now, and a recording will all come to you and anyone else who registered. We want you to have this information and be empowered. And what we're also going to be sending you is a toolkit. And this is where I'll be disrupting the screen share in a moment to share the toolkit and then go back to you. We have a new toolkit where we lay all of this out. It's totally public. We want to empower the masses to take on these campaigns. So where do you start if you don't have a key weapons company in your area or a key corporation you're already taking on? We have 3 starting points for you. One is Chevron, which is invested in a massive oil field fossil oil extraction off the coast of Palestine. You'll hear more about that from AJ. The second is the Maersk campaign. Maersk is a transnational shipping company that ships the weapons and the weapons components for genocide. You'll hear more about that from Aisha and from Adan. And lastly, we also want to highlight Israel bonds, which are direct investments from cities and states and unions in the war machine. This is not exactly the same kind of campaign, but we want to highlight it. We want to invite you to come back on December 11th to learn more. And we'll also be sending out toolkits that touch on that. So that's key strategies. Really quickly, I'm going to show you our toolkit. So we have this and we have so much more to share with you than what we'll share tonight. So in this toolkit, which will be going in the chat in a moment, it's publicly available at this link. We have info about these 3 corporations. We have a whole criteria of how to identify corporations to target. And I want to emphasize here, we do not think that Raytheon is going to turn around tomorrow, have a crisis of conscience, and start creating something positive for society, right? What we think is going to happen is corporations that, for instance, accept sponsorship from a company like Raytheon or handle the logistics and shipping or lease the office space. These are the companies and the institutions and the governments which can be convinced to make a moral and a fiscally sound choice to cut ties with genocide. So it's these secondary targets that are so critical. And this is what you'll see the toolkit really lays out how to effectively pressure in order to have a win for freedom in Palestine. This toolkit also includes tactics that have been used historically and a criteria set to help you think about what should we focus on. Like, is Chevron locally movable? is the brand of a local company that rents office space to one of these big companies to be have corporate social responsibility? Are there multiple avenues to pressure a company like Maersk in my neighborhood? These are the kind of questions you should be asking. And lastly, there's three case studies about how organizers ended the sponsorship by weapons companies of the South by Southwest Festival with over 100 artists heeding a boycott call. There is a case study on Maersk. You'll learn more about this today. And there is a case study of an incredible campaign in Chicago that ended almost $2 million of taxpayer dollars to Boeing, which arms genocide. So I saw someone ask about Boeing in the comments. Check this out. See if there's a similar campaign that you could run in your community. And lastly, there's a ton of resources. So we want to know you're not alone in starting this work. And there's actually so much precedent and so much power that's possible. All right, so let's dive in. How do you get started? I'm going to pass it now to one of our incredible USCPR organizing fellows, Adan. Adan is in New Orleans, a place of incredible organizing and community work. And yeah, she's just got a lot to share with you about how do you get started finding such a big corporation like Maersk in your local community. Take it away.
Amazing. Thank you, Leah. Hi, everyone. My name is Adan, and I'm with the Palestinian Youth Movement New Orleans, but also No Ship New Orleans Stop Helping Israel's Ports. And so I'll be introducing a bit of that, how to localize the strategy for a huge national campaign like Mask Off Merce. And for context, No Ship is a local grassroots organization. We do have a sister group now in Minnesota called Teapot, or Twin Ports Against Weapons Trade, because it's happening literally everywhere. But we're dedicated here in New Orleans to pressuring economic and government leaders in all of Louisiana to end all trade ties with Israel. Campaign at first, and that was to end the Israeli Innovation Embassy, which is a symbolic letter of intent between the Port of New Orleans and the Port of Ashdod in Israel. That letter of intent portion made this a strategic target for us because at the time of starting No Ship and right now, this pact is still symbolic, just intent to strengthen ties between Israel and New Orleans. But we've been using that momentum of this contract that hasn't really been signed yet to really mobilize our community, especially our Arab community, to care now. And they have. We've smeared not only the port of New Orleans and bothered them at their workplace every month for a year now. And also other corporations complicit in normalization with Israel that signed that letter of intent. We've made it very unattractive and exhausting to keep talking about it and to hopefully go through with it. But it's an ongoing process. But it's important to note that because here, 1 year later, a similar thing is happening with Maersk in New Orleans. A new $500 million Maersk terminal has been reported to be being built just 30 minutes from New Orleans. And so now, what do our young organizers who pretty much started a year ago, some of us, who've had very small successes dealing with relatively small town business leaders, do about this? We can't shut down this terminal being built, but like, what can we do now? Luckily, we found that information around the time that PYM National announced this national campaign to pressure Maersk to divest weapons transfers to Israel. So having them as a resource and a strategic guiding light has been incredible. But yeah, during this time, PYM NOLA was very small, had about 2 people even juggling focus on this Maersk campaign, very limited resources, but No Ship was obviously a perfect fit. I was involved with it, still am, and we leaned on this solidarity partner to build upon the research skills they developed, tracking the number of weapons from here to Israel through the International Trade Commission's database, as well as No Ship's work directly and consistently confronting port leaders and media with the information that we've been finding out. So with this campaign in particular, we're lucky to have the precedents from other chapters, which is not always the case with campaigns like PYM chapters. We have got those precedents, but we also have the local history of BDS work in New Orleans. We've also been looking at the economic landscape of New Orleans. And for reference, Louisiana has 5 of the top 15 busiest ports in the US. So New Orleans is number 5, but overall we've got a third of the busiest ports in the US. So it's important for people here in the South, especially to get involved in this work and to learn how to understand what's in these ships. Like they're invisible, genocide transfer ships. We don't see what's inside, but that information is available online if you know where to look. But we had so many targets that this Maersk campaign really helped focus No Ship and focus us on one specific target besides just the whole port. So right now we're in this phase 1 research and discovery phase, and some of our early steps have been to hold teach-ins to recruit new members early on and build capacity, which has been so important. And something I learned from USCPR's fellowship, which was like such a simple thing, but just talking to one of my advisors made a lot of sense to just hold a teach-in and kind of use PYM's materials that already exist, although we've held teach-ins where we're creating that material ourselves. But localizing it so people understand kind of what that local threat is, what local past decisions on this kind of stuff have been, as well as sharing the databases and resources that we've learned. And then we take anyone who's interested afterwards. Obviously, we do some light vetting and train them on these databases after. So yeah, we're also asking the community for help and how to Skillshare and many different strategies of this campaign. You know, from labor to learning what you can do with legal to research to actions. We're also monitoring what's happening around us with some Google search alerts around the new port terminal being built. And even before we had lawyers like integrated in our team, which I highly recommend, like there's so many lawyers that are in our movement in New Orleans. I don't know how everyone else is, but it's been very nice to have them. Even before that, we figured out how to send like FOIA requests to the parish/county where this terminal is being built. And it's how we found out the contract hasn't even been signed yet for this terminal. So we weren't able to see the contract because it hasn't been signed yet. But yeah, now that we have recruited lawyers, we have more interesting strategies on how to file paperwork to get more information out of different structures and organizations and governments. But yeah, I don't know how long I went, but to summarize, when you are getting started, it can really start with you or a couple of people just researching after finding out something really like problematic, like the letter of intent for the innovation embassy. But you're gonna need a lot more people to support you. You need diverse skill sets. You need to popularize this campaign and to make it last. And sometimes even one organization can't do it alone. And that's like where coalition building comes in, or like finding your solidarity partners that have done this work or have this kind of capacity and experience. Because it can be really, really overwhelming to take on such a big target, and that's why PYM has called on everyone in the world basically to help them with this. And you can do that as well within your world, as long as it's a strategic target, as long as it feels a little bit movable, and the people kind of want to go after it. So I think those are important things. And yeah, I think it's also our duties, like Palestine. Like as a Palestinian, I know Palestinians here in the diaspora and American allies will not free Palestine, but we have a very specific duty to fight back on American-made weapons and American corporations that are causing all the disruption in our home. Like you said, Leah, at the start was a really good grounding of just how complicit we are and how much we enable this. But yeah, my passion is not corporate pressure. It's scary sometimes. And if Israel is watching, like I hate corporate pressure, but I know it's the most important thing we could possibly do in America. So I encourage everyone to take up this work and to learn from the people in your locale and also learn from history and, just answer the call. So that's my spiel. I can watch the Q&A if anyone has specific questions about no ship and like working in New Orleans and just where we're at with this campaign. But again, we're very new and you're going to hear some really interesting speakers who live and breathe and eat this. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Aden. I have one quick follow-up question for you. I think there'll be questions in the Q&A about some of those details on the databases, but I actually want to follow a question that Nauman submitted in the chat, which is asking, like, do you have to be a lawyer? And I wonder if I could expand that and just say, could you share a little bit about like 2 or 3 of the skill sets or backgrounds of people in your group and how you found them to be useful?
Yeah, no, you don't have to be a lawyer. There's literally one person who came to the convening in July and was like, I have ADHD and I really liked watching Legally Blonde growing up, and like this is what I want to do now. And she gets very hyper focused, and it like a lot of our research started with that one person who presented like some crazy stuff that she had found, and we were all like, holy shit, we have to do something about it. But it started with one very hyper focused person, and you don't even need to be that hyper focused. You just need to like get together a group of people, do a study group, try to get back in that zone of like studying and working in a group project, because that's what it feels like sometimes. And then, yeah, building upon what other people have done to kind of figure out what your next steps are from that research. And so I suggest having a lawyer around just because they makes it easier and figuring out what next steps can be and how you can like work the system and talk to specific people, especially when you're young and starting out and don't know how to like access this information. But You definitely do not have to be a lawyer, especially in the beginning. Just like do the research. And ADHD is a superpower, absolutely. Or like Adderall or whatever. I'm not suggesting you do that, but like find something that you're a little bit obsessed with and just go dive deep, and you'll find, unfortunately, so much stuff. So,
Thank you, Adan. That was really beautiful. If you could please bring the slides back, Kat. And as we're doing that, I just want to again emphasize like your special talents, the special ways you work are such a gift. I've seen architects, event planners, artists, teachers all have really special roles and movements. And truly there is a role for everyone, even if this is the first time you've thought about joining an organization. All right, so we're about to dive in. That was a beautiful share about how to get started and some of the research that started things in New Orleans. Now we're going to talk about how to keep moving and sustain. So, we're going to be hearing about the Cut Ties with Genocide Mask Off Maersk campaign. This again is a shipping company, logistics, they ship the weapons. And we're going to be hearing about the Chevron campaign, which fuels genocide. And you'll hear about the major role that Chevron plays in enabling Israel's kind of energy economy. So let's get started. I'm going to bring up Aisha and AJ to speak with us. Y'all can turn on your camera. And we've got a few questions, and we hope to have a little bit of time for Q&A. So keep dropping those in the Q&A. Again, I do just want to emphasize we will be sending you the we'll be sending notes, recording, slides. We want to make this as accessible as possible. All right, let's get started. So let's begin. We've seen groups interested in this idea of the People's Arms Embargo. It sounds really cool. How to actually make it happen is so much harder. I'm wondering, Aisha, if you could start us with this question of how did y'all land on Maersk? And how do you see Maersk? I know there've been big wins recently. How are you seeing in real time the way that pressuring the corporation Maersk is actually bringing us closer to a global arms embargo?
Yeah, great question, Leah. Thanks for having us on here. Hi, y'all. I'm Aisha. I'm with the Palestinian Youth Movement. Um, so I feel like it would be good grounding just to kind of walk us through how we even started this campaign. We're a transnational, independent grassroots organization. We have chapters all over the US, all over Canada, Britain, Italy. And we've been pushing for a ceasefire, especially in the imperial core, especially in the United States. Like our chapters were exhausted. We had passed ceasefire on city level, state level, to the point that we got the Democratic Party, saying in words that they supported a ceasefire, but materially sending billion-dollar packages of military aid over to Israel. And so we knew that it was hakifaldi, or like empty words. Like you could say the word ceasefire a million times over, but they were not materially invested in actually enacting a ceasefire. So we said, okay, how do we as the people actually forward a ceasefire? And that's through stopping the facilitation of weapons over to Israel. Obviously, our elected officials aren't going to be doing that. So what can we do as the people? And it was at that point that we decided that we wanted to think about what companies would be strategic for us to take on to be able to actually have a material impact on Israel. And, we've thought about weapons manufacturers, like we thought about, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin. There's a lot of campaigns, really good campaigns that are going on about them right now. And we were also like, it's really difficult to target a weapons manufacturer and tell them to stop making weapons or to stop selling weapons to their number one buyer, which is obviously going to be the Zionist entity. And so we said, what are the ways that these weapons being facilitated and transferred actually to the state of Israel? So we started looking into shipping companies. And it was really clear immediately that the largest shipping company in the world, which is Maersk, it's one of the most profitable companies in the world, had contracts with the Department of Defense. And then soon we found out that they also have contracts with the Israeli Military of Defense. And so through then, we basically decided that we would start a pressure campaign to basically hurt their bottom line and be able to isolate their relationship to genocide and their relationship to the Israeli defense. And so it was at this point that we, called for an international people's arms embargo, and we got a million different contacts, mashallah, especially different contacts from around the world who said that they actually wanted to participate in this campaign. And so at this point, we were able to track where the weapons were being made in the United States, or at least a couple of the different weapons manufacturers, and then the specific routes that they were actually traveling to go to the Zionist entity. And quickly, we were able to establish a pattern. So without getting into the nitty-gritty of research, a bill of lading doesn't become public until after a month of the ship actually finishing the transfer of its cargo. And so we don't know what's on independent ships as they're flowing, but we also can see a pattern, and we know historically that this was what has shipped actually the military cargo. And so from there, we realized that actually majority of these ships were stopping at the port of Algeciras in Spain, which does have an arms embargo against Israel. And so we sent a briefing along with Progressive International to the Spanish government. And just this week, the Spanish government responded immediately by actually rejecting two of the Spanish ships, or two of the Maersk ships that were supposed to dock in the port of Spain, because that would violate their arms embargo. Which is a huge success, because now this disrupts the typical routes that Maersk takes. And they've been scattering around the Mediterranean, figuring out what port are they going to dock at now. They have tried to dock at Tangier in Morocco, and the people have responded with resistance. Many port workers have refused to work these ships. People have protested en masse. Hundreds, thousands of people are at the port. And now there is the final ship that is trying to dock there, the Seletar. And we expect that there's going to be continued resistance to this. And so, I mean, long story short, it started with a great idea that has now created a diplomatic crisis for the Zionist entity, and normalizing Arab regimes like the Moroccan government. What are they going to do, even though they've normalized with the state of Israel? Are they still going to continue to allow military cargo? And I can get into the specifics about this, but I think one of the really great things that we've been able to do just this week specifically was, up until this point, Maersk was using deceitful language to basically distance themselves from the genocide. They were saying that they have a standard policy, that they don't ship arms and weapons or munitions to a conflict zone. But this week we were able to show that they actually were shipping military cargo. They were shipping Oshkosh tactical vehicles. They were shipping armored plates that were used for tanks and missile projectors, etc. And so now the Spanish government has basically confirmed our research, and Maersk doesn't have anywhere to hide anymore.
Yes, I'm seeing some love in the comments, right? And I just want to emphasize Palestinian Youth Movement is an all-volunteer organization of thousands of young people who are literally stopping weapon ships, right? And so I just want to emphasize how powerful that is, right? That it takes a lot of work, but we really can enforce the arms embargoes that our political leaders are failing to. I want to pass it to AJ now. So tell us, Houston local campaign on Chevron. Why do you all believe that it's strategic to target Chevron, and what are some of the ways that you're thinking about targeting Chevron locally?
Yeah, thank you so much. That's really incredible to hear, and makes me so happy to hear about the successes that you've had. Um, in Houston specifically, I will say the PYM chapter here has been working pretty heavily with the Mask Off Maersk campaign, as we have one of the largest ports in the Port of Houston. But with Chevron specifically, obviously this is one of the biggest polluting like multinational oil and gas firms in the world. Obviously, there are a lot of very large companies that are complicit in the genocide. But Chevron specifically, one of the reasons we decided to target it is one, there is an international movement, both represented in the DSA International Committee, that has been targeting Chevron because of their, I think, 2020 acquisitions of Noble Energy. These basically is their first entry into the Israeli markets. And so they have taken a pretty substantial role in the infrastructure of the state as well. We think that being a very recent venture by Chevron, these will be much easier to win concessions from them. We also think that, compared with, I think, the $293 billion of total revenue that they made in 2022, only 1.5 billion of that came from Israel. So this would be substantial cut to the Zionist entity, but it would not relatively affect Chevron that much. The way that they have been complicit, and like you said, really enabling is the better word. They operate and partially own the two gas fields, Tamar and Leviathan, which are connected by the East Mediterranean gas pipeline, or the EMG pipeline, which connects into ports in Egypt. They have another one planned for Cyprus and Greece, and into Ashkelon, really close to off the coast of Gaza, basically. This The drilling and refining that they do contributes to quite a lot of Israel's electrical infrastructure. It supplies the Israel Electric Company, the state-owned company, 98% of their power, which goes to their cities, but also to military bases, to settlements in the West Bank, and also has allowed the IEC to cut off power to Gaza as a form of collective punishment. So Chevron has really been directly responsible, I feel, for a lot of the crimes committed against Palestinian people. And here in Houston, not only since we have started this campaign, they've changed from their headquarters in the Bay Area and moved to Houston. And we have coordinated with activists in the Bay Area who basically celebrated them leaving, and we had an unwelcome week for them, and let people know that this awful corporation is taking an even bigger presence in our city. And we have, grown up around Chevron as a very core part of Houston's culture in a weird way. They sponsor some of the biggest cultural events like the Houston Marathon. They're all over basically every single sporting event, and they care a lot about their image, despite being one of the, I think, most polluting and most litigious oil and gas corporations in the world. And so, yeah, we that's one of the reasons that we thought that Chevron would be strategic. One of the reasons why it was we thought it was necessary to look at them. And yeah, I can talk a little bit about the ways that we've been targeting them. Would that be all right?
Yeah, please do. And I hear people asking in the comments about labor. So feel free to get into that in terms of different sectors. And then I'll follow up with you, Aisha, with that question. But yeah, please, how have you been targeting them? Who are you moving to target them? Who's well positioned to affect them?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that Chevron is pretty known, even in compared to other oil and gas conglomerates, as being very what's called vertically integrated. Basically, everything from refining, drilling, most of the logistics, even security, they handle through companies that they own, which means that it opens them up to a lot of areas of pressure from labor, from the public. You really can't go to a career fair in Houston without seeing Chevron. And so, without getting into specifics of things that we're planning, there are a lot of, I guess, strategic industries that Chevron covers, and a lot of places that, even places like here in the South, are already unionized. These are oil workers, steel workers, logistics workers, and some of the non-union pressure groups that we've been looking at as a way to harness, people power, has been, because the marathon is such a big target for us, has actually been local run clubs, and other areas that are sponsored by the Houston Marathon, and just showing them hey, this is what the main sponsor of the marathon is complicit in. This is how we can reject it, and how we can, publicize this to everybody, and really bring this forward. So yeah, I'll toss it off to Aisha, but yeah.
That's an amazing story, I think. And Aisha, could you share a little bit more about how are you all thinking about labor unions in particular? Someone asked about workers and port workers, and I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, at a baseline, right? Like we know the history of dock workers and the struggle against apartheid, for liberation for many different countries and revolutionary national liberation struggles. And so I think there's really something concrete there as we're seeing what's happening in Morocco and Spain. I'm based in Oakland, so I know the history of Local 10 here and the way that they refuse to handle any military cargo. For apartheid South Africa, which actually had a catalyzing effect in their liberation struggle, and also now refusing to handle any military cargo destined for the Zionist entity. They've actually passed a resolution already. So I just want to like flat out start saying that the revolutionary potential of dock workers is immense. And like just to be real, right now, the United States is at one of the lowest points of organized labor. That we have one of the lowest amount of people who are actually in unions, and so something that we're really doing with this campaign is, since it's a mass campaign, right? It's the largest shipping company in the world. It's interacting with us in virtually every one of our sectors. And so it's a really good entry point to actually begin to talk with unions about what is Palestine, what is their role in this genocide, and how can they support this. And so, when we're thinking about truckers, when we're thinking about folks who work on the railroad, and we're thinking about dock workers, like there's a material way that labor can actually refuse to handle cargo that's actually destined, or military cargo specifically, that's destined for the Zionist entity. But beyond that, it's like this is a really good entry point to actually talk to different unions, get them to pass resolutions, just begin that conversation on what is imperialism. And I think that Maersk, because one of the catchphrases that we have is that the shipping lines are basically the imperialist veins of the world, right? Like this is quite literally where the veins are that connect the United States to all of these other settler colonial nation states. And so really being able to use that to concretely talk about what is these larger geopolitical struggles that we're dealing with. Maersk is a horrible company, not just to Palestinians, but also across the board when it comes to environment, when it comes to labor rights. And so there's a lot of ways that we're able to have a conversation about how we have a mutual enemy. And it's very baseline, but it's important because we need people to be unionizing, and we understand the role that workers play in revolutionary liberation struggles. And so it's a really good beginner step.
Awesome. That was so well said. I want to respond to a little bit of what's happening in the chat. Many people are asking excellent detailed questions about research, about campaigns. If you are with a group of people or forming that group, whether it's like two people, like I then described in New Orleans, or a group of 10 or 50 union members, we'd love to support you. So if you're with an organization, you can actually specifically sign up for our GAIN network for strategy and support. And I just want to turn people's energy to that, because we're not going to answer every question, but we can connect you with coaching and trainings, and we can host more trainings. So join that if you are with an org and wanting to organize collectively. I want to pivot actually to this question of individual impact. And I know that we are coming up against a very challenging time. We purposely hosted this webinar after the election because we knew that regardless of who won, corporations would continue chasing profits and would continue responding to threats to their future bottom line. So we do think that this matters no matter what. But I'm wondering if you all could share a little bit more about how do we take a stand against companies, especially considering repression and fascism? Like, what are the ways we can be impactful, keeping in mind high risks and keeping in mind that many of the people who are so passionate, like the workers on the front lines, many of them have precarity introduced by the global injustice systems, whether it's immigration and economic precarity. So, what are some of the ways we can exert that power, knowing that repression is possible, knowing that some of our people can be very vulnerable?
Yeah, I think that's a really great and very practical question. I mean, I'm talking in a right to work state, and who knows what the NLRB will look like under Trump. But I think it really has been impactful. I think from seeing since like 2020, being vocal and being loud, and that there really are power in numbers, and that often whenever you're taking on these types of big risks, whether it's like standing up to your boss, or or taking on these larger, I guess, uh, systems of imperialism, um, building solidarity with each other, being public and inoculating really well, making sure that people know the ins and outs of what can happen, what the kind of support we can give each other. Because I think that the worst thing that we can be caught by is fear. I think it can be paralyzing, and I think as much as so many people are scared right now, I think every single organization and movement is also having a huge resurgence at the moment. I'm about to go to our general meeting down the street, and we've had more RSVPs to that than we have in at least 4 years, probably longer. And so I think that we have to be together, and not to be cheesy, but we have to be brave.
I love it. And I want to actually just ask you to share a little more concretely if there's like one or two steps an individual can take, how can they support the Chevron campaign?
I mean, in addition to being a major divestment campaign, we are also calling for individual boycotts. So you do have the option of boycotting Chevron at the pump, as well as at Texaco, their other main subsidiary in the US. And if what we're doing additionally is just printing out stickers, you don't need a whole lot of people to do this, to just ones that say stop fueling genocide, or some ones that have links to information. Put them around, let your community know, and also just see. You might be surprised, especially if you're in the South. There's probably an oil and gas company, and it might be Chevron sponsoring some major event happening. So become aware of that, fight that, and talk to your neighbors, talk to your coworkers, talk to your friends and family about this. Don't shut up about it.
That was fantastic. Aisha, tell us with Mask Off Maris, in repression conditions, repressive conditions, how can we have an impact?
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, I definitely have to uplift our petition and our phone banking calls to action. Right now is really the time where we need to hit Maersk where it hurts the most. They've been trying to deny their involvement in this genocide, and right now we've been able to prove that they are actually invested and profiting off of the genocide. And so we want to make sure that we're driving that point home. And so thank you. You guys are dropping these all in the chat. So make sure that you sign our petition. Make sure that you're setting out the emails, phone bank as much as you can, and then be popularizing the campaign as like, the ask that I have as a campaigner on this team. But beyond that, I also want us to really think about collectively what is our role in being able to actually hold these corporations accountable. And I just really want to uplift what AJ said. Like it can start with a coffee date. Our impacts are always going to be magnified with people power and in the collective. And so build with unions, have those conversations, get to know your neighbor. I know that it feels sometimes trivial, but that's actually where everything starts. And so I'm not gonna, I know we're at close to time, but I'll stop there.
And that was really beautiful. I hope that if people take one thing away from this webinar, it is that you can take a step tomorrow. You can join with a friend or a neighbor the next day, right? Like we actually have a lot of power because the global economy is made up of individuals with special skills and special roles that can each clog up the imperialist machine. So I really hope that folks are like feeling that and feeling that power. I want to ask you all about climate justice. So we know that corporations like Chevron have for years been targeted by climate justice movements, fighting the unjust system of extracting oil from indigenous lands and polluting the climate and poisoning the people. Where does challenging climate injustice fit into your campaign? Maybe AJ, you can start, and then Aisha.
Yeah, so Chevron has been challenged and sued in almost every single continent, in hundreds of countries, for their crimes against people and the earth. And I think what they're doing in Palestine is just an extension of that. We've seen about the ecocide that's been committed in all of Palestine, and particularly in Gaza right now. And I think what we really have to do, as people in the movement, is recognize and I think popularize how we aren't just talking about individual issues. This isn't just about Palestine, and it isn't just about labor, but nature and ecology really affects each of us, and it is all of us. And Chevron is, even if they weren't involved in Palestine, they would be one of the most polluting companies in the world, and have trying to hold their grip on fossil fuel capital while it's being challenged right now. Um, there are really great reports on all their crimes they have done, all their intense ways that they've litigated environmental protesters and lawyers across the world. And I think, yeah, I would just say that it is incredibly connected at every port, at every sorts of oil extraction, and that you know, in the short term, we're talking about divestment. We're talking about, you know, getting rid of the complicity that we have in the genocide in Gaza. But long term, I think we know that we have to move away from these systems of production, these capitalist and imperialist systems that are it's killing us. It's killing our planet. And yeah.
So well said, AJ. Um, I feel like I'm on the same wavelength as you. Like when I think of Maersk and the context of our campaign, the difference is like I think Maersk tries to maintain this really progressive facade. Like they declare that they were going to go carbon neutral by 2040 after a pressure campaign from environmental activists. That's because Maersk quite literally contributes 1% of all the greenhouse emission gases that the world faces every single year, which shows how large of a company this is. And so we've been really trying to think about ways that we can build with environmental activists to be able to actually unpack what greenwashing is and what green colonialism is. Like, how are you going to say that you're going carbon neutral and that you want to actually be, partaking in the climate justice movement as you're facilitating a genocide, as you're literally supplying weapons to the Zionist entity, which we know has a million of different environmental impacts on the world, because war is one of the worst things that you can have for the climate crisis. And so this is an angle actually that if anybody here is really interested in taking up research for this campaign and specifically wants to look at the environmental angle, that would be something that we would really love. It's a mass campaign. There's so many different angles that we could take up with it. And there's a really big leg here that we're just now beginning to venture into. And so if anybody's interested in it, please just drop your email or send it in the chat, and I would love to connect with you after.
Thank you so much, y'all. We have just a couple minutes, so I want to close with one more question. I'm wondering if you could share in a year, like what's a win that you can imagine for your campaign, or maybe even quicker than a year from now.
Um, I mean, in January, we are going to be hosting the Houston Marathon, and we don't really see Chevron pulling out as the primary sponsor this year. But what we're trying to do is to make enough of a presence and be disruptive enough to get them to pull out for 2026. So yeah, I guess that's one win that we're looking at.
Man, that's a great question. If you asked me this last week, I would have never expected that we would have had the win that we had this week. I would say that, within a year, it's definitely possible that Maersk officially drops its contracts with the Israeli Military of Defense if we are able to sustain this pressure. I think that that's something that we could actually attain.
Wow, that's extremely powerful. A lot can change when millions of people focus our energy on strategic targets. So I just want to say thank you all so much. It's been incredible having y'all on. I want to close with some resources that we have sorted out for y'all. And if we still have a minute, we might throw y'all one more question. So, Kat, if you can please bring the resources right back. Um, and I'm also going to shout out because we're getting so many good questions. I just want to emphasize it's so powerful that we have so many people on the line who are thinking at a really high level. about this work. So I again want to emphasize that you can sign up to join our grassroots advocacy and organizing internal like strategy networks for trainings and coaching. All right, so you can go to the next slide. I want to share a few things with y'all. The first is that we will be back in a month to learn about Break the Bonds. There are direct investments from unions like the UAW, from places like Florida. We'll be learning about both of those from our USCPR organizing fellows, Lydia and Shahanaz, and we really want you there. So please sign on. Next slide. I also want to make sure that folks know, again, thousands and thousands of people can really make an impact. We need your help. You'll actually see that the page is actually transformed from that original page I was seeing. We have about like 10 orgs signing on to this action alert. Emails do matter. If you can get 10, 15, 20 more people. And as you know, when folks sign on to these emails, they get a follow-up email that says, here's more ways to take action. So we really do want you taking these tiny actions at the same time as we take these much bigger targeted actions. Right, next slide. All right, so we have a toolkit for you as well. Again, we need to keep up the pressure on both fronts. So the legislative and the front is not a front we can give up on, right? The US is too complicit for us to throw up our hands and say there's no way that we're going to stop these politicians from handing out weapons to the Israel lobby, right? So in this toolkit, you'll see all sorts of amazing resources, including what senators to target. You'll see links to guidance about effective ways to move members of Congress. And you'll also see just a lot of Q&A because we know that Congress really needs to be demystified sometimes for ordinary people to make impact. And then you can go back to the slides and show the very last one. So on the last slide is our new toolkit about the People's Arms Embargo. You heard it first. We released this toolkit literally 50 minutes ago when we started this webinar. So we really want you to use this toolkit, send it around. And I just want to emphasize so many of the great questions y'all answered. There's a resource in that toolkit that's going to help you. I want to highlight a couple things. First, our friends at AFSC, if you could scroll down to the resources section, please, Kat, at the end. Our friends at AFSC have an incredible BDS office hours. It's every Tuesday. It'll be every Monday in December. You can see how to sign up at the very end of the toolkit. This is an incredible resource. You can talk to the people who did the research for the Chevron campaign. You can talk to them directly about your local campaigns. I want to emphasize this is for campaigns. It is not for individuals. So if you have individual questions, contact at USCPR, look through this toolkit. But if you are trying to run a campaign, these people are here to help you, and they're really incredible. Right below that, you'll see that our friends at Little Sis, total genius researchers for the movement, are here with resources. They've got trainings that you can watch, and you too can become I think Adan was describing like study hours. Ordinary people with a laptop can watch that Little Sis training and become quite an expert on all these filings. Businesses have to disclose a lot, and you can figure this out yourself with just a little bit of guidance. Lastly, I want to emphasize that there is actually money and resources and trainings out there. If you have a beautiful vision for how to manifest that world where corporations can no longer exploit our people and exploit our earth to create weapons to harm the Palestinian people, check out Ruckus and Blackout Society. Check out Beautiful Trouble, which has an amazing toolbox to help you dream really big about what actions can look like. And these have a whole range of risk levels and modes. So there's every single person out here has a capacity to participate in action to make the empire tremble. So I just want to emphasize that as we're wrapping up. Again, please follow No Shift. Please follow Houston DSA. Please follow Palestinian Youth Movement. These are incredible all-volunteer organizations that are literally enforcing an arms embargo, that are literally making Chevron quake in its boots, right? So please follow them. Please plug in. Take 3 minutes after this call to take a couple actions and text one more friend. And I just want to thank you all powerful people for being here. We'll see you in December. We hope to hear from you before then. And all the modes we released in the chat, and we will be emailing you all this good stuff. So thank you again for all you do. The Movement for Palestine is made up of thousands of folks, including the 400 people who've been with us all night. And we're very powerful together. So thank you again. Gratitude to each of you. Please do also give some love to our panelists in the chat. They're really brilliant, powerful people. We're lucky to have them. Thanks y'all so much.
Thanks for having us, Leah.
Good night, y'all. Take
Thank you so
care.
much, everyone.
Okay.